Good morning, and welcome to the Alameda Connection on KCSM HD2. I'm your host, Scott Piehler. In a world where newspapers and broadcasting outlets are increasingly bought up by national conglomerates, there's been one sector that's been rather hard hit: local news. Well, in Alameda, someone decided to do something about that. That someone is Adam Gillitt, publisher of the Alameda Post. Full disclosure for this episode, since April of 2022, I have worked for the Post, primarily in the role of their podcaster and also as a sometime writer. Spent time talking with Adam about what it means to cover local news in Alameda and the importance of that coverage to the larger community. But our talk wasn't all seriousness. We also spent time talking about the Post's resident cartoonist and where to get a good bite to eat when you're in Alameda. I think you'll enjoy my conversation with Adam Gillitt, publisher of the Alameda Post. Well, good morning, Adam, and welcome to the Alameda Connection.
Hi, Scott. Thanks so much for inviting me.
For those of you listening, we're actually doing this from a very historic building. There was a newspaper in this building, wasn't there?
There was for many years, the Alameda Times-Star.
When did they exist?
Oh, they were around middle of the century. I think they stopped publishing in the 90s. Mm-hmm. Their imprint was bought out by the Bay Area News Group.
Okay.
And so they're part of the conglomerate that is now the East Bay Times and the Alameda Journal and the Oakland Tribune, San Jose Mercury News.
What led to the journey of Adam Gillitt coming to Alameda and eventually becoming the publisher of the Alameda Post?
Well, I grew up on the East Coast, and after I finished college, I moved out to the Bay Area, and I lived in San Francisco for a while. And then in 2002, I was looking to buy a car, and I found something I thought was really great on Craigslist that happened to be in Alameda. And like everyone else who lived in San Francisco, I thought Alameda was by Antioch or something like that. Like I'd never been around the East Bay to find it. And so I came out here, and I got out of my car, and I spent all my summers on Nantucket and Cape Cod when I was a kid. And when I looked around, I was at Washington Park here in Alameda, and it just reminded me both of everything I love about the Bay Area and everything I missed about the Cape. And so I bought the car, which was a mistake, and that's a good show for another time. But I moved here 6 months later, and I just fell in love with Alameda. I love the history of this place and the fact that we are in the middle of everything, but we have our own unique identity. And so I got involved with the city first by, actually, believe it or not, a lot of people don't know this, I ran for city council back in 2010. Oh. I lost to some guy named Rob Bonta. I don't know what happened to him.
He fell right off the map.
Yeah, but I came in 7th out of 8, and that sort of launched my ability to get involved around the city. I ended up on the board of the Alameda History Museum, where I met Dennis Evanosky, who used to be the editor of the Alameda Sun. And back in 2021, he was running the paper by himself and was a little overwhelmed and asked me to come in and help out. I had a lot of fun doing that because I have a fairly extensive background in working in media. My first job out of college was designing the weekly paper at the Harvard Business School.
Oh.
And I also was involved in reporting and designing interactive news graphics at ZDNet News.
Okay.
And a bunch of other things along the way. And so it's something that's always been an interest of mine. Unfortunately, it wasn't meant to be. And after a couple of months, the opportunity ended. And while I'd been at the Sun, though, I was paying attention to what they were doing, and they were very much in the mindset of a 20-year-old weekly newspaper.
Got it.
And in 2021, we were right in the middle of COVID.
Ah, yes.
And everybody was spending their time doom scrolling on their phone. I realized that was an area that Alameda was lacking. There was no online news presence in Alameda. Around the middle of December in 2021, we launched with our first post that was about the retirement of a historic waitress, a woman who was the first African-American waitress in Alameda who worked at Ole's Waffle Shop on Park Street. And so I had a chance to show up and talk with her. And it was kind of fun because I showed up and I explained, hi, I'm with the Alameda Post. And she just looked at me and took it at face value and talked to me and let me interview her for the story. And I was expecting to be turned away as like, who is this imposter?
Right.
And so that was our very first story. And from there, we've been growing ever since. We offer a variety of programming. We have history walking tours where we explore the island with Dennis Evanosky, who now works here.
And I have to say one thing for people who maybe from the greater Bay Area, coming on one of these history tours is wonderful for many reasons, but my absolute favorite is being on the street with Dennis, walking by a plaque and having Dennis read a plaque and go, that's wrong.
I think Dennis's favorite phrase is, no, it's not. These history tours have been really great for us because not only does it give us a chance to get out and meet the public, we've gotten all kinds of staff from it, including the person I'm speaking to right now, Mr. Piehler,
That's right.
who joined us for our very first history walking tour.
And that was hilarious because my wife and I had been on the island for literally 2 weeks.
And we started discussing podcasting, and Scott made the mistake of saying that all of his podcasting equipment fit into a suitcase so that he was able to do it any time that we needed it. And so I was like, great, you shouldn't have told me that. You're on the hook for good. And now we're over 170 episodes later. The podcast still comes out every Friday. We also offer a weekly newsletter that comes out on Friday as well. We are involved in other aspects of the community. We provide candidate forums when there are elections. We had them last year for city council and for mayor. For school board and city council. And this coming year, we'll be doing city council and mayor again. When we started, we were this upstart. We were just the only online source of news in Alameda. But within a year and a half, we became the only news source in Alameda when the Sun went out of business. Although the Alameda Journal does remain, they have very little Alameda content.
Now that's sort of the long and the good, deep explanation. But when you're doing an elevator pitch and, what's the Alameda Post?
Alameda Post is your one-stop shop to find out everything that's going on in Alameda, everything that's going to happen, and everything that has happened. And that's actually something that makes us unusual in a lot of news organizations, is that one of our tent poles is history. And we really do care about Alameda history. That's why we have these tours. We have a history section that is full of articles about local houses, local neighborhoods, local historical figures. And, Alameda is an island, both physically and kind of spiritually. A lot of other places don't cover what goes on in the city. We felt that, or I should say I felt, and other people have joined me now, so now it's we, feel that, these are stories that are important that people need to know about. And as wonderful as it is to find that Alameda Police Department found a kitty inside someone's car engine, we're dedicated to making sure people know what happened at city council and the planning board and the school board and what happens in businesses and families and organizations all around the community.
I'm going to touch on something you said earlier, which was being from the East Coast as I am, and I'm from New England as well. When I got here, there is a reminiscence of New England in various parts of the island. I walked down one street, I forget what it may have been Dayton. I said, I feel like I'm in Connecticut.
You'd be surprised if you go over to the east end of the island. There are a couple of streets that are named for Cape Cod.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Let's talk for a minute. You're talking about being the source for Alameda news. And I will say, and I have a running joke I make with people, is that Alameda gets lost in the shuffle between Oakland and San Francisco. And I was talking with somebody the other day and I said, it's kind of like this. A man sneezed on a tricycle in San Francisco. In Oakland, there was a parking violation. A kaiju may have emerged from the estuary on Alameda, but we're not sure.
Well, Alameda is the only city in the Bay Area that touches both Oakland and San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
And so we are often caught up right in the middle. But yeah, we're kind of invisible. I've always said that we have, do you remember Steve Jobs was accused of having a reality distortion field? That's
Right.
kind of what I think is over Alameda. When you drive down 880, unless you notice that one exit that says Alameda, you have no idea that it's right there. And that was my problem when I lived in San Francisco. I had no idea. And now, 20 years later, I rarely leave the island.
This leads to a concept that's getting tossed around in the news these days, that of a news desert, where there is no coverage of local news. What do you see as the dangers of a news desert? What happens?
Well, that's actually something we stared down this summer. And I have to give a big thank you to our community, because we realized earlier this summer that if we didn't raise some funds, we were going to go out of business on Labor Day. And thanks to the generous support of a local business called Penumbra and many donors from our community and local businesses, we're actually going to stick around for a while and keep Alameda from becoming a news desert. Now, a news desert, as Scott said, is a neighborhood, an area, a community that has no local news reporting. And when that happens, what fills the space? Rumors and Facebook and Nextdoor and Reddit and all sorts of unverified places where people can post anything, but there's no actual vetting, there's no fact checking. And in this day and age where we see in national news stories, people are deliberately seeding false information, it's really important that you have a local organization in your community that you trust, that you know is honest, that you know is paying attention and is keeping track of the facts. We really want to make sure that Alameda doesn't become a news desert, which it would be ironic. We're in the middle of one of the most tech-dense areas of the world, but really, if it was not for us, Alameda wouldn't have any local reporting anymore. That's something we want to make sure it doesn't happen, because you can't verify what you read on Facebook. people can post anything and it sounds real. And I get caught every now and then. And I
Right.
have to make the real effort when I see something that I say, oh, that's weird. I didn't know that. I have to go and verify it just to make sure. And I find 50% of the time the stuff I see actually is wrong. And I have to stop myself before I share it with anybody because I don't want to be responsible for disseminating rumors.
And it's funny, I don't think people don't realize that it's not that those stories are necessarily negative. I am a major sports fan, and I cannot tell you the number of stories I deal with that this particular sports figure, it's usually sports figure of team you follow, donated X dollars to amazing cause. And it's a flat out fabrication. And even though it seems like a good idea, covering Alameda is interesting. The Post does one thing that I found to be an interesting choice in this world of social media where basically narrative drives a lot of content, where even your major broadcast networks, they have a heavy ideological bent. The Post does not endorse candidates nor give recommendations on
Oh,
propositions.
we can't. We're a nonprofit, so we're barred by law from doing that.
Okay.
If we did, we would lose our nonprofit status.
How have the reactions been to being the local news source, to doing things like candidates forums for a city like Alameda?
Well, it's been well received because without the information we provided, the past 2 election cycles, we were the only organization that held in-person candidate forums. A lot of other organizations held them over Zoom, which is informative. But I think to get a sense of who someone is and what they believe in, it's really helpful to be in the same room with them and to be able to have a chance to talk with them afterwards, shake their hand, and get an idea of what they stand for. We let the candidates' words speak for themselves. There are some candidates, they'll say something and you'll hear you'll read what they say and you'll say, I wonder. And there are other people who they'll say something and it seems completely normal, logical, and makes perfect sense. It's not for us to distinguish between the two. It's for us to present what they say. And the response we get is mixed. I mean, some people think that the whole point of a community newspaper is to report on the stories that matter most to them individually.
Right.
And we get a lot of people saying, oh, I'm really disappointed you didn't cover X because Y is really important to me and X was all about that. And we have to explain that, part of our limitation as a news organization is that we have a limited staff. We have limited hours we're available, so we don't get to cover everything. And we also try to present things in as neutral a way as possible. But to be perfectly honest, every organization has their biases.
Sure.
And ours, I'm aware of. We are progressive leaning.
Mm-hmm.
We are for progress. I mean, I should say lowercase p progress. We're for making things better. We're for getting involved so that you have a chance to have a say in how things are going to happen. And that's one of the reasons why I started the Post in the first place, is because Alameda is full of people who have been here forever and they like things just the way they were all the way back then. But Alameda does one thing over and over again. It changes constantly. If you go in 30-year segments, you can go all the way back. 30 years ago, the naval station was just closing, and that really impacted Alameda. But you look at it in all these different chunks, and all Alameda does is change. And Alameda is going to keep changing, but the important part about change is to get involved so that things change for the better, so that you have a voice in what that change is, so that your concerns are heard and you're a part of that. And we've really been working hard to make it easier for people to get involved by providing them with the information of meetings and events in advance so they can participate and make themselves heard. And people have responded well to that. And with a community this size, we are your one-stop shop to find out what's happening and what's going on and what's going to happen. And we need to make sure that the entire community is included in that, and we don't just favor one segment of the community.
I do have to give you credit. It was actually as a mutual discovery of yours and mine, which is the cartoon. Alameda Post has its own cartoonist, Brees, who does Two Birds from Alameda, with a great representation of the stodgy old Alamedan seagull and the newcomer, who is a Canada goose named Goose.
One of the things I really appreciate about Brees's cartoon is how gentle it is. He's able to show Alameda's schism. Like we Alameda is 50% for one side and 50% for the other side, and always has been. It doesn't matter what it is. The In-N-Out, when we first got an In-N-Out, 50% of the community was like, yay, finally an In-N-Out. 50% of the community was like, ooh, boo, it's going to bring crime. And of course, well, it turns out everyone's happy to have burgers and there hasn't been much crime from it. But Brees really manages to straddle that divide in such a kind and generous and gentle way that he doesn't make anyone on either side feel like they're on the wrong side. He really gives, his cartoons really give a chance to air both viewpoints in a way that doesn't favor one or the other or denigrate one or the other.
I think my absolute favorite moment with Brees and Two Birds from Alameda is when an actual real live Canada goose caused a power outage on the island, flying into a transformer, and Alameda Municipal Power literally reached out to Brees for comment.
Well, his cartoon has really improved our publication, and I'm really glad he's a part of what we do.
Who are some of your journalistic heroes?
I grew up in the era of Walter Cronkite and John Chancellor and David Brinkley, and I remember how important it was having a newscaster you trusted. And, even up through the days of like Peter Jennings and Dan Rather. And then that all kind of fell apart. And, now there's people out there who are really taking it on themselves to present the news, even without their own organization. One person that I think of is a woman named Rebecca Solnit, who I follow her posts on Facebook. And she has very rigorous research standards and makes sure that what she publishes is attributed and is accurate and honest. And I think that's a really great model. I think there's one of the things that technology has democratized is the ability to cover news and the ability to report on it. Long before we started, you'd need a whole crew. You need a photographer, you'd need a stenographer, you need someone to take notes, someone to, record the whole thing. Now, our reporters can go out with their phone and they can shoot video, they can record audio, they can transcribe it, they can put everything together. And I think that is really admirable because, we're not going to move towards AI and have computers replace all that. But I think it's really great that now we can have these sort of reporting teams that are one person that can go out and actually cover the entire story by themselves. Other reporters that have done that in the past. I hesitate to admit being a part of the MTV generation, but MTV was really good at that for a while of really uncovering stories that you wouldn't see otherwise. And, as far as small town journalism, there was a reporter who worked for the East Bay Times and the Alameda Journal who died a few years before we started, a guy named Peter Hegarty. And he was a great reporter who was really involved with the community and unfortunately wasn't replaced. And so the Journal doesn't really do a lot of reporting around Alameda now. But there's some other great reporters out there right now who are from Alameda. As a matter of fact, Deepa Fernandez, who's one of the NPR hosts that lives here in Alameda, and several reporters for the Chronicle and for Channel 2 and Channel 4 and Channel 7 are all Alameda residents. Two people that I really want to call out, though, that have really had a huge impact on what I've done with the Post would be Dennis Evanovsky, who is here working with us as our historian, and Julia Park Tracy, who was the founder of the Alameda Sun and was on our board when we launched. She no longer lives in Alameda, but she's been a great resource and really someone I look up to as understanding the needs and requirements of reporting for a small town.
How does it make you feel when one of the San Francisco outlets picks up a story? Because that's happened a few times. I've seen something start in the Post and it winds up across the bay.
Well, it would be nice if it came with royalties. However, our biggest role is to expose Alameda, is to make sure that everybody knows what's going on here and to see all the wonderful things that are going on in the community. And I can't really get jealous when someone else figures out that something wonderful is going on here. I have to be honest, I wish some more important news stories got picked up widely and circulated. One story that went wide that really caught us off guard, but was such fun. It was something we discovered while we were on one of our walking tours, which is a property on Grand Street was purchased by this gentleman in San Lorenzo, sight unseen. He heard that there was a property for sale on Grand Street for $100,000, which, that's kind of the fanciest street in town where all the big houses are located. And so he bought it sight unseen, and he sent his realtor to take a look at it after he'd bought it at auction. And it turns out that it's 10,000 square feet, of which 500 square feet of it was above water. The other rest of it is in the lagoon. But ironically, it is zoned R1. If he could figure out a way, he could build a single family residence on it. But there is no way because it's water. It's up against a bridge and the bridge is so low, you couldn't build something that boats could pass under. So he's now pled financial insolvency and is trying to sell the property for $400,000. And as crazy of a story that is, it really ticked all the boxes. And I saw that on all the major networks in San Francisco, as well as several of the newspapers picked it up.
That was Ken Durr's original
Yes.
reporting one. That
And,
was delightful.
and the thing, talking about getting royalties or something like that, is it was funny to me that a lot of the reporters that stood up and reported on it were just quoting his words without attributing it to him. So thank you, Ken, for a great article.
What's the best compliment you've ever received about the Post?
It's not so much the compliments that I've received that have been best, but just the gratitude.
Okay.
The people really appreciate, being able to stay informed about what's going on in their community. A lot of people still really love printed newspapers.
Sure.
And I come from a background of print design. That's what I did for many years before I started the Post, as I was a graphic designer and web developer. And I couldn't justify the cost of printing on newspaper, especially as a daily.
Right.
But even as a weekly, for something that people would read once and then recycle, it doesn't make financial sense. But people really have appreciated and have figured out now that they can get their news locally every day at our website. And for those that have not really gotten on the daily news bandwagon, they can subscribe to our weekly newsletter, which is about as close to a weekly paper as you're going to get here anymore. But the people come up and thank me, especially for our candidate forums, where they had a chance to hear about political candidates they didn't know what they stood for, gave them an opportunity to really plan their vote better and really understand who they're voting for. And people are just grateful that we cover the stories that otherwise wouldn't go reported. I keep coming back to covering city council and the planning board and the school board, but those are three bodies that really affect everybody's lives in this city.
Let's shift out, focus a little bit to the wider Bay Area, because the Post has been very good at covering events going on, and Alameda is quite an arts center. But let's talk a little bit about the events calendar, and you've actually got a separate website from Alameda Post for people.
Well, a separate URL.
A separate URL.
It's a little internet trickiness.
Right. Yeah. A little sleight of hand. Let's talk about that for a second.
One of the problems that I heard about when I first started the Post was there was no central calendar available to Alameda. Everyone was maintaining their own individual events calendar, but there was no place where people could go to plan events to make sure that their event wasn't competing with another important event. We started out with having a calendar on the site that we hosted ourselves that had some limited abilities and was fine to start with. But then we partnered with this company that's based out of Utah that's called City Spark. And they work with a bunch of other publications, both here in the Bay Area and around the country. And by being a part of their network, all of a sudden, not only do we have a calendar that's full of Alameda events, but we have a calendar that's full of events all around the Bay Area. And what's great is we have our calendar set up. If you go to it, it's either on our website at alamedapost.com/events, or if that's too much to remember, you can just go to it at 94501.info. All of those events, the calendar defaults to showing what's happening in Alameda, but there's a filter where you can just change the distance. And all of a sudden you can see all the events that are happening in Oakland and San Francisco and Berkeley, and it goes as far as 50 miles out. It actually goes even further than that if you'd want to search for Los Angeles or San Diego if you're traveling in the state. But what it's really done is it's given people a central location to go where they can find out what's going on. And it went from being a sort of an afterthought to now it's the second most popular page on our website.
What is the first?
The homepage.
Okay. just checking. Two-part question. What keeps you at the Post, and what keeps you in Alameda? So, as the publisher, what keeps you at the Post, and as Adam Gillitt, what keeps you in Alameda?
I looked around and I realized that with the two weekly papers really not serving the community, that someone needed to step up and do something. And I talked to other local news organizations, one that has multiple news outlets around the East Bay, and I asked, did you consider creating a version of your website for Alameda? And their response was, no. There wasn't really the business and the traffic for it. And that's really been borne out. Like, we are a community of 75,000 people. We're not going to, I'm not going to have millions of people coming to my website. But the fact is that these 75,000 people really need and deserve the news they're getting. So until I can find someone who's willing to take over for me and is willing to do all this, I'm going to keep doing this because I'm just lucky enough that I have the confluence of skills that make running this organization really work. I went to college, to be a high school English teacher. I have a lot of writing and photography experience. I have programming and graphic design experience, and putting that all together, there was really no one else who was available to do that. And I'm finding now that we've been operating for a couple of years and now we have employees, I have to sort of take a piece of myself, partition it off, and create a new job for someone to do.
Right.
But I still have about 7 or 8 left inside me to yet to partition out. But then the other half of your question of what keeps me in Alameda, Inertia. I mean, all my stuff is here. No, I fell in love with Alameda the moment I visited. And the first time I set foot on the island, I just fell in love on the spot. And I'm lucky I live in a wonderful old house. It was built in 1905. I share it with my partner, Ben, and 2 cats. And it's just a great place to be. We have a big backyard. It's quiet. We're near everything. I can walk to the beach in any direction. And honestly, everything you need is in Alameda. Yeah, okay, fine. I go into Oakland every now and then, and San Francisco even less frequently. But Alameda is a real revelation to me as what a community can be, where, there's room to walk, there's room to bike, there's room for sports, there's room for arts and creativity, there's room for families, there's room for single people, there's room for kids, for older people. It's just everything you can possibly want is in this one easy to navigate community.
It really is amazing. You touched on the walkability of this city, which is something I'm always amazed by, because I used to live in suburban Atlanta. And my wife and I just came back from a visit to suburban Atlanta, and on a 4-night trip, we drove 300 miles. I don't think I do 300 miles in 2.5 months.
My car is a 2005, and I just broke 65,000 miles on it. Okay, so yes, that's true. I put maybe 2,000 to 3,000 miles on my car every year, and that's it.
I'm going to just have a little fun here, because you and I are both huge fans of the Alameda restaurant scene. You've got guests, and you've got to take them to 3 places on the island to eat. Where are you going?
Well, I've always said that one of the best things about Alameda is you can get indigestion in any language here. But we have some really unusual restaurants, types of restaurants you don't see other places. And maybe my favorite is a Speiskammer, because I love German food. My mother is German, and so a lot of the things that she used to make for holiday food is stuff that's on the menu there. And so I love going there. But also a more unusual genre of food is Cambodian food. And there's a really wonderful place on Webster Street that's called Phnom Penh House.
Oh, yes.
And their food is wonderful. And then the third I'd like to pick is another unusual one, is there's a place down on Park Street that's called Wild Ginger.
I have not been there yet.
It's very good as long as you have a high tolerance for spice, because they make very spicy food, but it's Chinese street food.
Okay.
And they have just wonderful stuff. But their thing is that there are really very few bad restaurants in Alameda. Like, there's nowhere that I'd say, like, you need to avoid that place. The local restaurants, people here really seem to care about the product they put out. And, we have restaurants of so many different genres and so many different ethnicities, types of food. And, you could go months and sample a different restaurant without having to repeat. And I think that, my 3 choices may not be your 3 choices, but there are so many other choices that I haven't mentioned that I would be very happy to take people to, or be taken to, for that matter.
What would you say to someone in the greater Bay Area? What good is the Post to someone who may not be on Alameda?
Well, we keep track of everything that goes on, and there's a lot of especially artistic groups and opportunities that are happening here. And then the other thing that we do that I think is really worth following is that we cover the interesting people that are in Alameda.
Adam Gillitt, publisher of the Alameda Post at alamedapost.com, and 94501.info for the calendar. And then some guy does a podcast called the Alameda Postcast, which you can find on your podcast sites too.
And we're also on all social media platforms at Alameda Post. For most of them, I think on Instagram, we're alameda.post. But thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Absolute pleasure. Take care. Thanks once again to Adam Gillitt, founder and publisher of the Alameda Post, for spending time with us here on the Alameda Connection. Once again, as a reminder, in the interest of full disclosure, since April of 2022, I have worked for the Alameda Post in their role of podcaster and have been known to write the occasional article as well. If you'd like to follow along with what the Alameda Post is doing, find them online at alamedapost.com. If you're looking for a 10-minute summary of what's going on in Alameda, you can check out my podcast, the Alameda Postcast, available at alamedapost.com/podcast, or just ask your smart device to play the Alameda Postcast podcast. Coming up next Sunday on the Alameda Connection, join me for a conversation with Jennifer Radakovich, the Executive Director of Rhythmix Cultural Works. We'll talk about the importance of a multicultural perspective on the arts, what the arts can teach us about ourselves and others, and why it's important to bring the arts to the people. That's next Sunday at 8 a.m. Jennifer Radakovich of Rhythmix Cultural Works on the Alameda Connection. As always, thanks to Bill Hart for our theme music. The song is Beachside Isle, and it's from his 1999 album, Watch the Sky. I'm Scott Piehler. Catch you next week on the Alameda Connection.